Vampire Conquistadors. According to Mark Rosewater, Magic the Gathering's chief designer, Jenna Helland, the manager of Magic's story team, pitched Ixalan block to Wizards of the Coast's R&D department and set the tone of the world using these two words. On one level, a metaphor for the parasitic and vampiric nature of colonialism, and on the other, a goofy excuse to put vampires into Morian helmets. The essence of Ixalan is captured in the phrase Vampire Conquistadors. They represent both the set's absurd and over-the-top nature, and its very loose grounding in 15th and 16th century history. These Vampire Conquistadors would later be joined by Mayan-inspired merfolk, the freewheeling pirates of the Brazen Coalition, and the Aztec culture meets Jurassic Park craziness of the Sun Empire. For all of its wackiness, however, Ixalan block is not well loved by the Magic the Gathering community. With a very low level of both power and complexity, Ixalan never made the tribes it featured into viable deck archetypes for Standard, and its draft format is not well regarded. But personally, I'm fond of the set, and I feel that Ixalan is worth re-evaluating. As you may have guessed from the title of this video, re-evaluating Ixalan. Any discussion of Ixalan block should begin by looking at the set's main selling point, its 4 tribes. Ixalan was the first Magic the Gathering set to fully focus on tribal synergy since Morningtide in 2008, which was a full 9 years before Ixalan's 2017 release date. To offer a quick definition, a tribal set is a set that's focused on making creature types matter. In Ixalan's case, the block encourages players to build decks featuring many vampires, dinosaurs, pirates, or merfolk. The Vampire Conquistadors of the Legion of Dusk were available in white or black. Generally, vampire decks focused on using life as a resource. They allowed their controller to gain a lot of life and then spend it to activate powerful effects, such as Vona Butcher of Magans, which allows you to destroy any non-land permanent for the steep cost of 7 life. The merfolk of the River Heralds could be found in green or blue. They had a simple but effective game plan. Merfolk decks attempted to spread around as many +1/+1 counters as they could, over as many creatures as possible, before swinging in for the kill with overwhelming force. There were also a few unblockable merfolk, namely River Sneak and Mistcloaked Herald, who became massive concerns to any opponent if they accumulated too many +1/+1 counters. Cumena, Tyrant of Orazca, demonstrates the strategy many merfolk decks were going for. By tapping enough a merfolk you control, Cumena could become unblockable, and by tapping 5 other merfolk, he gave each of your merfolk a +1/+1 counter. The dinosaurs of the Sun Empire were printed in red, green, and white. Many dinosaurs bore the Enrage mechanic, which meant that they did something nice whenever they took damage. Trapjaw Tyrant was probably the most viable dinosaur with Enrage. Whenever the Tyrant was damaged, it would exile an opponent's creature until it left play, thematically snapping them up with an ensnaring bite. Many dinosaurs had expensive mana costs, and so they relied on support from human cards, such as Drove of the Mighty and Kinjali's Caller, to ramp them out more quickly. Finally, the Pirates of the Brazen Coalition were available in red, black, and blue. Pirates came with the Raid mechanic, previously used by the Mardu Horde. I guess it's thematically appropriate the Pirates stole their signature mechanic from another faction. Raid gave pirate cards bonus effects, or reduced their cost, if an opponent had already been attacked earlier in the turn they were played. This encouraged pirate decks to adopt a very offensive strategy, swinging in repeatedly to trigger beneficial effects. Pirates were also the faction which interacted the most with treasure, little artifact tokens which could be sacrificed to generate a mana of any colour, or amassed in order to win the game through the card Revel in Riches. Now it's true that none of these tribal strategies were really powerful enough for Standard. Merfolk came the closest, with a Tier 2 Merfolk tribal deck emerging, but beyond this, Ixalan's tribes left almost no impact on the competitive environment of their time. This is a huge shame, and I feel one which caused the tribes of Ixalan to be judged overly negatively. The fact is, even though they weren't really tournament viable, Ixalan's tribal decks were, and remain to this day, incredibly fun to play. Okay, so this doesn't really slot into any format, but building decks using the tribes of Ixalan to play casually against your friends across the kitchen table leads to some pretty fun gameplay. This is also a great way of teaching new players the game, and about how tribal strategies work. In their time, these tribes also offered a fun and clear blueprint to new players to help them put together decks which could serve them well at Friday Night Magic. So ultimately, Ixalan's tribes weren't competitively viable, but at least in my opinion, this doesn't mean they weren't any fun to play around with. The second most notable thing about Ixalan was its exploration theme. The set was based on the Age of Exploration, bore the tagline, "Brave the Unknown," and this idea of setting out to explore new lands permeated the set both thematically and through its gameplay. Both the Explore mechanic and the set's double-sided cards conveyed this message. The Explore mechanic was placed on several creatures. When they enter play, their controller reveals the top card of their deck. If it's a land, they put it into their hand, otherwise they either place it back on top of their deck or into their graveyard, and the exploring creature gains a +1/+1 counter. Flavorfully, this mechanic is a home run. Cards with Explore strive out into the unknown, as represented by the unknowable face-down cards atop your deck. In doing so, they either uncover new lands or grow stronger from the experience. Double-sided land cards were equally effective at conveying the concept of exploration through their gameplay. They frequently depict a journey and a destination. Treasure Map is the clearest execution of this concept. You have a treasure map, you follow the landmarks listing on it, and you find a cove full of treasure. But this concept is also conveyed in other creative ways. Vance's blasting cannons shows how the pirate captain Ripley Vance carves a fortress into the cliffs of Ixalan using the broadside cannons of her ship. Legion's Landing shows an expeditionary force establishing a military foothold, and Search for His Counter represents diving deep underwater, represented by discarding cards from your deck to the graveyard in order to find sunken ruins. Personally, I feel that Ixalan's exploration theme is executed wonderfully. Explore is both a fun and a flavourful mechanic, and the double-sided cards are fantastic. Many of them also serve as new, fixed versions of old, incredibly powerful lands from the game's past, requiring you to jump through some hoops in order to access them. Iflamok, Cradle of the Sun, and Vault of Katnakan are rebalanced versions of Gaia's Cradle and Tolarian Academy, respectively. When Ixalan comes up in conversation, usually its poor quality limited format is the first thing which springs to mind. The primary argument made against Ixalan Limited is that it's an on-rails experience, and that once you've drafted each tribe a handful of times, you're essentially going to have very similar drafts again and again and again, each time you give it a go. Let's demonstrate this with a quick example. You're in the middle of an Ixalan draft, and you've got a powerful black and red pirate deck going. In pack 3, even if you open Sanctum Seeker, an amazing card that's in your colours, it won't be worth anything to you, as you're not piloting a vampire deck. As such, you'll be forced to pass it, and the card will just make its way around the table until it gets to a vampire player. Ixalan's on-rails problem can be seen when comparing it to Lorwyn, Magic's previous block with a heavy tribal theme. In order to diversify the kind of cards being selected, Lorwyn employed several shapeshifters, which were cards of every creature type, and could thus slot into any deck. For instance, Changeling Berserker could be employed in both Goblin and Elemental decks, where it would gain relevant bonuses. Lorwyn and Morningtide also made both a creature's race and class matter. So Frog Tosser Banneret, a Goblin Rogue who made both Goblins and Rogues cost 1 less, would matter both to a player building a Goblin deck and a Rogue deck. These measures avoided the issues of powerful cards simply being passed around eternally, and make Lorwyn a more replayable limited format than Ixalan. Another problem with Ixalan Limited is the format's simplicity. Ixalan's problems are in many ways equal and opposite to those of War of the Spark, which we discussed in a previous video. Whilst War is a controversial set, as it's arguably too complex, and games can become difficult to parse and analyse, Ixalan is unpopular as it's too simple, and games can become monotonous and repetitive. This was frankly admitted by Mark Rosewater in an article on the state of design in Magic the Gathering. He claims that for Ixalan block, we created a bunch of new rules at common, such as creatures that change their power and toughness at common must have square stats, which seriously messed with the development team's ability to add depth to limited. Many of Ixalan's common creatures either had no ability, abilities which are used in every set, or abilities which were incredibly simplistic in design. This was a reaction to the incredible complexity of prior sets, most notably Kaladesh and its energy system, though one which went a little too far in the opposite direction. To quote Rosewater again, Wizards' desire to fix complexity in Standard caused us to overcompensate in the other direction, resulting in Ixalan lacking the depth of prior and future limited formats. A final problem was that, for the purposes of Limited, the tribes were not created equal. Vampires and Merfolk, the two two-colour tribes, were generally both easy to draft and more synergistic, focused and effective when you did so. Pirates and Dinosaurs, the set's three-colour tribes, often worked best if you only actually drafted 2 of the 3 colours they were in. So, it was often best to draft a black-red, a black-blue, or a red-blue pirate deck, rather than one containing all 3 colours. This allowed strategies to emerge, and the draft archetypes of the set were designed with this in mind. This was somewhat counterintuitive, and could feel a bit restrictive. Finally, Dinosaurs were arguably the least effective of all the tribes, which was a shame, as they were arguably the set's main selling point. Being unable to guarantee that you'd always get the ramp cards you needed in Limited, Dinosaur decks were often too expensive to make practical. By the time your belligerent Brontodon or Burning Sun's avatar hit the field, your opponent's Merfolk deck would often already have established board dominance, and chipped your life total away into the single digits. To illustrate this point, there are 4 Dinosaurs you can open in Ixalan packs, which cost either 1 or 2 mana. In contrast, there are 7 vampires, 7 merfolk, and 14 pirates available for this cost. Although this could be alleviated by putting in 2-drop humans, some of which do possess dinosaur synergies, this ultimately splits the focus of your tribal deck. None of your humans would benefit from haste, granted by your Regisaur Alpha, and will be wiped out, along with your opponent's creatures, if you somehow manage to get Wakening Sun's avatar into play. I would argue that ultimately, the claim that Ixalan's limited format was lacking is a valid criticism. In fact, it's probably the primary reason why Ixalan is so poorly remembered. Your first Ixalan draft is great fun. In fact, probably your first 5 also are, but once you've drafted each tribe a few times, the experience does start to lose its luster, and feel samey and repetitive. There is a way of fixing this, however. Rivals of Ixalan was released on the 19th of January 2018, 4 months after Ixalan's September 2017 release. Rivals breathed new life into Ixalan's widely disliked limited format. Drafting Ixalan along with 1 or 2 Rivals packs is generally considered a far more enjoyable experience than drafting triple Ixalan. So what did Rivals do to fix Ixalan Limited? The first change was the new mechanic it introduced, Ascend. Cards with Ascend check to see if their owner controls 10 or more permanents. If so, they gain the City's Blessing for the rest of the game, which turns on a variety of positive effects for cards they control. For example, Dusk Charger gets +2/+2 as long as its controller has the City's Blessing, whilst Secrets of the Golden City upgraded from allowing you to draw 2 cards to allowing you to draw 3 if you had ascended. This, coupled with the introduction of several cheap and effective removal spells, slowed the pace of games down significantly, allowing dinosaur decks and those with slower game plans the time they needed to get going. Next, Rivals made every colour pair viable. White-blue and green-black had drawn the short straw in Ixalan Limited. They happened to be the only 2 colour pairs which didn't slot directly into the colour identity of one of Ixalan's tribal factions. Although black and green received the powerful Vraska Relic Seeker in original Ixalan, this was their only dual-coloured card, and was a mythic rare, meaning you only had a small chance of opening one in a draft. Blue-white didn't receive a single multicoloured card in original Ixalan, and, without some extreme luck, was basically unplayable. This all changed when Rivals came along. White and blue now cared about the new Ascend mechanic. Several white and blue cards, such as Squire's Devotion, Sailor of Means, and Aquatic Incursion, place multiple permanents on the battlefield at once. You could also use the enchantment-based removal the 2 colours offered to neutralise your enemy's threats while building your way towards the precious 10 permanents needed to earn the City's Blessing. Resplendent Griffin, the signpost card for the colour pair, demonstrates the Ascend-based strategy of the pair. A decently costed flyer without the City's Blessing, Resplendent Griffin quickly goes into a troublesome threat if you have it. Black and green, meanwhile, cared about exploring. Even in the original Ixalan, these 2 colours have been home to the most cards of Explore, as well as featuring Wild Growth Walker, a card which cared about the Explore mechanic activating. Rivals doubled down on this trend. Jadelight Ranger is a unique card, as it explores twice when it enters play. Path of Discovery turns every creature in your deck into an Explorer. Tomb Robber is an experimental card, which allows you to discard cards to trigger Explore repeatedly. Now, a lot's been said in this video about Ixalan Block's failure to impact Standard. These black and green cards are the exception to that rule. Golgari mid-range decks featured a plethora of Ixalan's Explore cards, until the set rotated. Explore helped these decks do what they do best. Dump a bunch of cards into the graveyard for later resurrection. Your Explore cards could grow stronger, whilst also thinning through your drawers and stacking your graveyard full of stuff ready to burst out. The presence of these decks in tournaments was referenced by Deadly Discovery, a 2019 Challenger deck. Challenger decks are slightly weaker versions of competitive decks, sold by Wizards of the Coast to get new players Friday Night Magic ready decks, which are playable right out of the box. This shows that Ixalan was able to produce an engine which helped run a competitively viable archetype in Standard. These 2 strategies also demonstrate something else fundamentally different about Rivals of Ixalan Limited when compared to its predecessor. Building a tribal deck was now an optional, rather than mandatory part of the draft experience. In base Ixalan, players essentially needed to build a tribal deck in order to compete, but in Rivals, there were plenty of other approaches to victory, whatever colours you happen to be playing. This is evidenced by looking at the decks used by pro players during the limited portion of Pro Tour Rivals of Ixalan. Elliot Boussard went 3-0 using a black-white deck, but, rather than making use of vampire synergies, this was a low-curve aggro deck. Gina-Manuel de Praz won his games using a 3-colour black, blue and red deck, which in original Ixalan would have meant pirates, but here was instead a deck which made use of a powerful removal suite in order to draw the game into its later stages, where he'd slam down formidable bombs such as Dusk Charger and Natsahol Primal Tide after his opponent's resources were exhausted. So in Rivals, the on-rails problems of Ixalan draft were wrapped up. If you wanted to, you could build a tribal deck, and blue-green Merfolk was still one of the most formidable decks in the format, but you didn't have to.
and you no longer needed to lock yourself into only caring about a single creature type if you didn't want to.
Rivals of Ixalan didn't transform Ixalan into a perfect limited format in a single swoop. The introduction of Merfolk Mistbinder and Legion Lieutenant, Lords for Merfolk and Vampires respectively, was contentious. The two cards were only uncommon rarity, which some felt made them too easy to acquire. A lucky Vampire or Merfolk player could amass a few more of these in a single deck than was probably intended, and creatures of their designated tribe would quickly grow ridiculously buff and tear through the competition. There was also the problem of the Elder Dinosaurs, or more specifically, one of the Elder Dinosaurs. The Elder Dinosaurs were a cycle of 5 dinos, one for each colour, which were designed as fun late-game bombs who could be brought out to close a game. Zitulpa, Primal Dawn, was a 4/8 for 8 mana, with Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Indestructible, and Trample. Zitulpa Primal Dawn was hard to deal with, and basically ensured their controller would win in a handful of turns, but this was balanced out by the card's very high mana cost. Netzahal, Primal Tide, was a 7/7 for 7 mana. The card couldn't be countered, removed its controller's hand size limit, and let them draw a card whenever their opponent played a non-creature spell. Netzahal could also be temporarily exiled by discarding free cards, thematically diving beneath the water to avoid trouble. This was a flavour win, and, as the card didn't possess any form of evasion, it wasn't too busted. Next, Ixalan Primal Storm was a 6-mana 6/6, who exiled the top card from both players' libraries whenever it attacked. Non-land cards exiled this way could be played for free. This was a really high variance card, and one which always let you tell a fun story, however it turned out. You could flip over 2 lands and get nothing, or 2 giant dinosaurs and throw one of your opponent's best threats out against them, or you could get anything in between. And of course, Golta Primal Hunger was a 12/12 Trampler for 12 mana, who became 1 mana cheaper for each point of power on creatures you control, enabling him to hit the field much earlier than could be anticipated. Golta was good, even standard viable, but could be removed easily enough, stopping them from ruining too many limited games.
Ooh, and excluding a troublesome one, there's also one more Elder Dinosaur, Zakama Primal Calamity. Though the card's hated in Commander, it's way too expensive and impractical to really see play in any other format, so it didn't really impact Rivals of Ixalan Limited or the standard environment of 2018. So as we've seen, 5 of the 6 Elder Dinosaurs were fine cards, which were powerful but expensive or impractical in some way to keep that power in check. Tetzamok Primal Death was not so carefully balanced. A 6-mana 6/6 with Death Touch, at the cost of a single black mana, Tetzamok can be revealed from his owner's hand in order to place a prey counter on a targeted creature. When Tetzamok enters play, every creature with a prey counter on it is destroyed. This was designed to convey the feeling of a lurking predator stalking its targets, filling them with unease, anticipation, and fear before finally pouncing in for the kill. This was the feeling which Wizards were going for, and they succeeded. Just a little too well. Tetzamok, if played correctly, effectively functions like a board wipe, which only targets your opponent's creatures, and brings out a 6/6, ready to capitalise on your opponent's now empty board state. Short of targeted discard, in other words, unless you happen to have drafted Dark Inquiry, there's not really a lot you can do about an enemy's incoming Tetzamok. This inability to deal with the card fills you with dread, but also fills you with frustration and anger. Tetzamok's one of the most powerful cards in any limited environment, but not a fun card. Ultimately, however, Tetzamok is only one bad rare, in a cycle full of other fun and exciting cards, in a set that's a huge improvement over its predecessor. So to conclude, yes, Ixalan wasn't a great limited format, but that doesn't mean it should be dismissed entirely as a waste of time and cardboard. The set's wacky and over-the-top vampire conquistador aesthetic makes it memorably weird, if nothing else. Beyond a handful of Golgari explorers, it didn't impact standard much, but Ixalan's tribes still have plenty to offer casual brewers and can slot comfortably into commander decks. The set's theme of venturing out and exploring the unknown was well delivered through use of the explore mechanic and double-faced lands. And, though Ixalan Limited did grow repetitive, drafting Ixalan and Rivals together offers a much more enjoyable experience. Well, unless you're up against Tetzamok. I hope you've enjoyed watching this re-evaluation of Ixalan block, and that it's led you to re-evaluate Ixalan a little. Unless, of course, you already like the block, or you hate it with a burning passion that just won't be dissuaded. Either way, that's great. Whatever you think of Ixalan's totally fine. Let's yell about vampire conquistadors in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.